I'm Lai Leong with the Center for Presidential History with my colleague Greta Swain. Today is October 28th, 2023, and we're in New York City. May I ask you to introduce yourself, please, and what you do?
I'm Frank Costigliola. I'm a Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor at the University of Connecticut, and I'm very pleased to be here today.
So let's start with how you got to know Professor LaFeber.
Well, I first met him. I arranged to have. I was a senior at Hamilton College in upstate New York, and actually my main advisor there was David Millar, who did his graduate work at Cornell, not with Walt, but he knew about Walt, and I was interested in diplomatic history. So I wrote to Walt with Professor LaFeber then at the time, and I asked for an interview, and so he agreed. And so I went to Cornell. It was March 15th, 1968, and. So this office was in West Sibley Hall, I believe in the third floor. So I was sitting there. I had no idea, days before the internet, I had no idea what Professor LaFeber looked like. And so I was waiting and sitting outside his door, and someone walked by, looked impressive, and I said, "Are you Professor LaFeber?" And he said, "No, but I wish I were." And that was Andrew Hacker, who was a very prominent political scientist. So then that's one of the few things I remember about the interview. But then Professor LaFeber came and we talked, and then I got rejected. I was not accepted to graduate study at Cornell, and that's the first chapter. Then I could talk about more. But yeah, that was my initial. We had a good discussion, but I was pretty naive, and I think. He never accepted many grad students. There are very few grad students. If you look at the people participating in this conference, most of them are former undergrads. I think Walt focused on undergraduate education more than graduate education. And so when I did, I could explain how I eventually did get in. But when I did get in and had a seminar with him the first semester, there were two students in the class, myself and another student, and that was the whole of the seminar. He did not take many grad students.
So how did you?
How did I get okay. So this is 1968, okay? It's called, Annus Horribilis, right? And so the draft was very much breathing on people's necks. The draft board, selective service ruled in the winter of 1968 that from now on, there could be continued deferments for undergraduate education, but not deferments for graduate education. So there was no guarantee of, getting into grad school and having a deferment. And I was a conscientious objector. I had applied for conscientious objector status, which is a category in the selective service. That had been turned down by the local draft board. The draft board is composed of mostly World War II veterans who thought this was a bad idea to put. That would be to be polite about it. They thought it was despicable. Someone would not want to serve their country. But I was against war, and there was a whole elaborate form I filled out and so forth, and had multiple interviews with them. But in any case, this had been turned down, and I appealed it to the state draft board. That was pending. This is all March 1968. And then so I graduated from Hamilton and had a okay summer job, but I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I thought actually that I might very well, I was going to, if I was inducted, I thought everyone had to basically set a line. If those people who were against the war in Vietnam and against war needs to set a line. Some people didn't cooperate at all with the selective service system, refused to acknowledge their letters or anything like that. And some people went to Canada. Some people decided to serve in the military. Some people did various things. I decided I would not go to Canada. I would not serve in the military. If necessary, I would go to jail. And that was my choice. But I would continue to pursue the conscientious objector status insofar as that was possible. So that was a situation in the summer of 68. And then along about August 15th to 18th or something like that, 1968, on just a hunch, a whim, I wrote a letter to Walt LaFeber, who by this point was chair of the history department at Cornell, and said, look, if the draft is taking so many young men, because there was obviously mostly men in those days, taking so many young men, if the incoming cohort of grad students has been reduced by the draft, I'm still not drafted, I would still be interested in attending. It was just a Hail Mary, just who knows, right? Just a chance. I was desperate. And he wrote back immediately saying, yes, you can come if you want, but there's no funding. You have to, no funding. So I had saved some money for my summer job over the summer, and so I used that for living expenses. I also had a New York State fellowship, which is good for any graduate school in the state of New York. And I applied that to the tuition. So I started, my grad study. If you don't have funding from the school, that suggests they really don't want you, right? But I didn't, but I did want to go, so I used that New York State fellowship for the tuition, and then living expenses was money I earned. And so I started that first semester, excited to be there, excited. I learned more that first semester in Walt's seminar than I think I ever have before or since. It was incredibly intensive 4 months. Again, only 2 people in the seminar. But still I had the draft hanging over me. So it was a very freighted kind of time. So people familiar with the interviews know that Walt was influenced by William Appleman Williams and Fred Harvey Harrington. I had no idea who these people were. That's one reason probably I had been rejected. And if somebody said, who's William Appleman Williams, I would have said, well, his parents lacked imagination when they named him. I had no idea who he was. So again, the seminar started, but as they checked books out of the library, they checked books out of Olin Library, so that you could check books out for 4 months, and they would stay up to 4 months in the book in those days. And so I looked at that, let's say a book checked out October 1st, we do February, March, something first, that was like my anchor into the future, that this book was due 4 months, maybe I would still be here at 4 months. It was that tenuous, okay? But I did managed to stay the whole semester, and I think I did well in that seminar. I learned quickly kind of the ropes. The seminar, the way it was set up, was similar to the way Walt's seminar with Harrington had been at Madison. And that is that we met every 2 weeks at Walt's house, Walt and Sandy's house on 24 Cornell Street. And Walt would assign 4, 5, 6 books to read in the 2-week period, plus primary sources. And the other person in the seminar, Bob Seidel, was 10 years older than I was, 22. 10 years older than I was, and knew vastly more. And so Walt would say, well, read these 6 or 7 books. And Bob would say, well, what about that? What about this? So there'd be 7 or 8 or 9 books, plus the primary sources, read in the 2-week period, and write a 8 to 10-page paper on it. So that was, it was an experience. And it was all geared toward individuals. The first paper, I still have the papers. First paper is geared toward Benjamin Franklin, second towards James Madison, and I think John Quincy Adams and James K. Polk. And this took us through the middle of the semester and ended up with, I think, Teddy Roosevelt at the end of the semester. So first half of the sequence. And so I did well, and by the end of the first semester, Walt said, well, we've been able to find funding for you for the tuition, and so you won't have to pay that. And so so that I didn't have to pay the tuition, and I had that New York State fellowship that was living expenses. So I was, by the beginning of the second semester, I was being funded through the state and through Cornell. And then at the end of the first year, I got a teaching assistantship and fellowships after that, and so the financial aspect was taken care of. But actually, unlike the situation today, I ended up finishing 4 years. I got my degree in 4 years and had money in the bank, and able to save money during my years as a graduate student. So so they go back to the study, the actual study at Cornell. It was Walt was as I talked about the draft when I was first signed in, first talked about his office hours, and he said his birthday is August 30th, and this is probably September 15th, 18th, something like that, and 1968. He said, yeah, he just turned 35, and he got a notice from his draft board, because in those days, if you were deferred the draft was really up to 26, but if you were deferred, you're technically liable to age 35. And then he just got a notice from his local draft board in Walkerton, Indiana, that he was no longer liable or vulnerable or whatever to the draft. So, but I mean, he was 13 years older than I was, but he seemed, and he was ages older in terms of wise but also, Walt is a person who was so many people say this, so down to earth and so welcoming, so a person who reached out to others, that you never felt stupid. I mean, I never felt that way at all. In fact, the way I felt, the kind of insecurity, there was always a lot of insecurity in grad school, for most people anyway, that he would praise me in ways I thought I didn't deserve. You know, it's just like, well, I don't know, you really think that? But I'll try to measure up to that, you know. And that was maybe probably a very effective way he had of trying to bring out the best in people. So yeah, I learned a lot that first year, and then second semester, the seminar was, do you have any water? We don't have any water here, do we?
We do. That's a.
I should have brought something, I'm sorry.
This is clean. We've had some water here all morning and nobody asked, so you're the first one to ask.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
It's been a long day. So second semester, there are more people in the seminar, about 6 or 7. It was good, but it lost that immediacy of, you know, and I began to learn I knew Williams was by this point, as I lost that immediacy of like, this was, you know, everything was new. I'd settled into it. And then I was, my conscious objector status finally came through, and I ended up doing 2 years of alternate service, which was required 2 years of alternate service, along with some other people we set up. And I lived in a halfway house for ex-mental patients. They're half Cornell students and half ex-mental patients. Project worked very well, supported, beautifully supported, generously supported by people in ethically donated furniture and refrigerators and stuff. We lived in a gorgeous house that was rented to us by a Russian professor and at Cornell. And anyways, that was a very good experience, a learning experience for me. So that was so it's 4 years at Cornell. That included the dissertation, included my last year doing research in Europe for my dissertation, which is on American financial and monetary policy toward Europe in the 1920s. Topic that Walt encouraged me to do. So yeah, I can obviously talk about other things, but that's the first 4 years. I can talk more about grad school or more about whatever you want.
Yeah, well, something that interests me is, you talk about the huge number of books that you were assigned. Especially at first semester when you say everything was new. What was it like walking into a seminar with Professor LaFeber, and perhaps because everything was new, perhaps not feeling, if you were like most grad students, maybe not feeling entirely prepared or not feeling, up to snuff. I don't know if you had that feeling. And if you did, how did Professor LaFeber respond to that?
Well, I tried to be as prepared as I could. I really took it seriously. I was glad that I was there. I didn't take this for granted at all. So I think I tried to be as prepared as I could. And it's the learning curve, learning exactly what you should do. And so he was, I didn't feel, I never felt, and this is, I never felt that he was critical of me, ever, in all those years, I mean, I knew him 53 years. So, so I mean, it was like, as I said, it was the opposite. I felt he was so praising me to such a degree that I thought, well, to try to live up to that. He was a very effective person in terms of bringing out the best in people and bringing out the best in many different kinds of people. I guess he probably had a good read on me and figured that I was insecure enough. He didn't have to knock me down, and that I would respond to praise, which I did.
Did you ever see him being hard with anyone else?
Being what?
Being hard on anyone else
who
was maybe less prepared than you were?
Well, there's one case. There was someone named Cleveland Donald who was now passed, but he was in this seminar second semester, and so we were reading about it was something about U.S. Teddy Roosevelt and intervention in the Caribbean, and Walt had written an article about this very topic, specifically this topic, and this guy Donald was going on about basically got the story wrong. And Walt didn't say anything except the rest of us, or most of us, knew that he was digging a very deep hole for himself. But Walt didn't let on. I mean, he was like, because I think well, in a way it was more damning for him not to say anything and let other people tell Donald after the seminar was over, boy, did you screw up. So no, he was very, and Walt would always see the glass as half full. I never, when talking with other people, he did, I remember one time he reviewed a book that was not a very good book at all, but yet he managed to kind of pull out of that book some positive things. Or there's another time we were talking about the scholarly work of a colleague of ours, of my generation, and I said, well, the thing about Bob is that he's never produced anything that I thought was like unusual or anything that was innovative or original. It was just the general, accepted story. That's all we get from him. And Walt said, and that's kind of a damning criticism, right? And Walt said, well, at least we get the Main Street story from him. Okay, but I know Walt expected that, especially he was prided himself as being revisionist in the tradition of Harrington and Williams, that someone who just had the plain vanilla story was not up to snuff. But he wasn't going to say that. He was going to find something good in the even in that circumstance.
So tell us more about how your relationship with him developed after graduate school.
So yeah, I was like, then he said, you can call me Walt after the 4 years. And he actually, a little bit, back up a little bit. So I did research for my dissertation in the first half of the 71-72 school year. And so my wife at the time and I came back from, he sent a letter, we were in Geneva doing research at League of Nations archives in Paris and in London. And he knew where I was going to be. And so I got the letter in Geneva, and he said, make sure you come back in time for the American Historical Association meeting, which is meeting after Christmas in New York, as it was. And my wife's family lived in Long Island, so we made sure we came back, I think Christmas Eve, so I could attend the conference, because he said, I have an interview lined up for you at the University of Rhode Island. So, okay, fine. I really did not intend that I was necessarily going to become a professor. I didn't think I'd be very good at it as a teacher. I thought there was a commune that a bunch of people were living in outside of Ithaca. I thought, I'll go live there for a while, and who knows if I'll ever become a professor. But I was always interested in learning about history, but whether I wanted to teach it or write books about it, I wasn't convinced I was good enough or that I would really enjoy it or be good at it. Anyway, so I had the interview, and then and it lasted an hour, and I came out, and people said, oh, how was it? I said, well, I don't know, less than an hour. I said, an hour. Everybody else, they let go after 15 minutes. And then I was invited for an on-campus interview in Rhode Island. And then they offered me the job. And so then I had to decide whether to take the job. And I remember sitting with Walt in his office. I said, well, thinking about living at the Dawes Hill Commune, I don't know if I really want to take a job right away. He said, look, take the job. You can grow flowers after, because this was a farming kind of community. You can grow flowers after you become a professor. And of course, growing flowers, I didn't intend to grow flowers, but that was Walt's way of saying, you can pursue your dippy, hippie, whatever, pursuits after you get a job. And also I think it was like, you think I'm going to help you get another job if you turn this one down, forget it. He didn't say that, but it was like you could draw from that conclusion. So I did take the job, but as it turned out, I bought 10 acres of land that first year I was there, and did pursue. I didn't grow flowers, but I grew other things.
So how did your relationship with him develop from then on? Well,
we would exchange letters, I think maybe twice or three times a semester. But I remember some phone calls also that at the end of, so I got the job at Rhode Island. I really threw myself into teaching. It turned out I was quite good at it. And I developed a new course in American Indian history. I really got into the teaching. I started publishing. I had an article accepted in the Journal of American History while I was still a graduate student, so I had that already. But it was not that I was just like totally focused on the book, because you didn't need a book to get tenure in those days. A few articles at top journals would be fine. And I had an article in the Journal of Economic History and so forth. So I had that pretty much covered. And but then Walt said, I think at the end of my end of my first, end of my second year at Rhode Island, he said, look, so my dissertation was on the 1920s and American relations with Europe. He said, you should expand on the economic and political stuff you have and look at the cultural dimensions of political economic relations. He says, I could take much. He said, there's a few books you can look at and so forth. So that became, a small seed that grew into a huge venture on my part that if you ask people about the book that eventually resulted, they'll say, oh yeah, that one of the books that pioneered the cultural approach to American foreign relations history. So I really got into that intensively. I mean, it had to do with the relationship between the expatriate artists and people like Fitzgerald and Hemingway and the economic impact of that expatriate American community, how it intersected with the American bankers. They're operating in Paris and Berlin and all this stuff. It was exciting stuff. So, but that was Walt's suggestion. It was Walt's suggestion, why don't you look at the cultural side of things? And then I remember a conversation I had with him. This had been the fall of '73. It was during the Yom Kippur War. I remember that. And that's just 50 years ago now. And I told him I was teaching this American Indian course. And he said, well, if you publish in that and you have your foreign relations, you're going to be a hot ticket. You're going to be, be able to go wherever you want. Or so it's worse than that, right? I didn't pursue research in the field. I just did teaching in it. So that's why I'm still at the University of Connecticut. But that was his encouraging me to expand my horizons and to promote my career. I saw Walt probably every 3 years or something like that. We would maintain letters and phone calls. And then things changed significantly, actually 17 years after I finished in '72, when in summer of '89 he asked if I wanted to teach summer school at Cornell, and I did go to Cornell and teach summer school. And as it happened, at the very end of that summer school session, I met a woman who was on the Cornell faculty in the English department, and we ended up getting married. So basically from 1989 on, and then that relationship ended in 2009. So for the next 20 years, I was in Ithaca a lot. I spent summers there in Ithaca, most vacations in Ithaca, long weekends in Ithaca, and so my relationship with Walt deepened significantly, and I can talk about that. It was, yeah. We found out that we really got to know each other much better. We started having lunches about once every month or so, and he would say, come over to the house at 12:30, and I would do that and stay until 5:30 or 6. I mean, it was like, and then I eventually had to insist on leaving at 5:36. My wife was expecting me to come back for dinner, but there'd be lunches fueled with lots of wine and coffee, and which I don't drink coffee usually at all, and certainly don't drink wine in the afternoon. But he was drinking too, so it was like, that fueled the conversation about all kinds of things. Not about sports. Now, there are many people who have a relationship with Walt based on their mutual love of sports, and that's very important with Walt. But he knew that I was not interested in sports, not since the Brooklyn Dodgers left Brooklyn in 1957 and broke my heart. So that was the end of my sports allegiances. But we would talk about gossip about other historians. We talked about historical interpretations of things, what he was working on, what I was working on. I just wish I had taken notes. I should have come home and jotted down notes, because I'm doing a biography of Walt, and so I wish I had kept a record of that. I remember a lot of the things he said, but certainly not everything. Those 5+ hour lunches. That was a really wonderful experience. I felt I really got to know him better.
Were there any particular topics or lunches in your memory that really pop out?
No, it was just, again, it was generally talking about the routine of who other people, gossip, and also more substantive talk about other people in the field, about archives of opening experiences. Each of us had speakers that he had at Cornell. He had all these people coming through, talking about, to a certain extent, talking about his families. I heard fair amount about Trevor and Matt and Suzanne and Scott and Sylvie, and that I got to know, and then I got to know them through Walt, and then also often his birthday's August 30th. I'd come usually after my first week of classes, come for a long weekend, and sometimes be there with the family, and then other people as well were celebrating Walt's birthday. So yeah, and then I did things like there was I forget what the occasion was, either maybe when he turned 70 or 60 or whatever. I organized a thing where we had I got like a large sheet of like a sheet like this of like not just kind of heavy cardboard kind of, but it had Walt's students sign at Schaefer, and I did work this for about a year, so write little messages or stuff on it to celebrate his birthday. But I forget, it was 60th or 70th, and I framed that and gave that to him. I tried to go out of my way to show how much I appreciated him and what he'd done for me and what he'd done for other people. I mean, one thing about Walt is that you could do things for him, but he wanted to do things back. It's partly, I mean, I think I got to know him better than a lot of people. Walt was a very generous, open, caring, giving person, but also a person who's private in a lot of ways. There's a part of him, a wide part of him, that's generous, again, open and so forth. But then you get up to a certain point, and even his family told me this, that this is then he's his own person, and it's not revealing of a certain aspects of himself. And so, and part of that is, I think he's a person who likes to be, who is good at being in control of his social interactions with other people. And one of his ways of doing that, in a very generous way, was to focus on his interlocutor, the person he was talking with. And most people, there's students coming up to him after class. That's the other thing, attending his seminar, not just seminar, but his lecture classes, and work as a TA for 4 years in grad school. So he would, pay enormous attention to whomever he was talking with. And but that's also a way of shifting the attention away from him to the person he's talking with. And, that's so he was very good at it, and people appreciated the attention and so forth. So I think I got to see him a more intimate look at him than most people have had, I think.
If I may pivot just a little bit to Walter LaFeber, the historian.
Yeah.
As you came into your own as a historian, as a professional historian, were there ever any instances where you had disagreements about the craft?
Not about the craft, but we had disagreements about Franklin Roosevelt.
Tell us more.
Right, and that was, I think, Walt, for some of the reasons I talked about today. Were you there?
I was not.
Okay, right.
Busy with
some of the reasons I
interviews.
talked about today. Roosevelt and New York liberals in general were not, for the most part, not his favorite people. I think he rightfully saw Roosevelt as being the first imperial, the 20th century, aside from Woodrow Wilson, first imperial president, and that he was not enamored of certain aspects of also East Coast elitism, kind of Hudson River aristocracy, kind of rubbed Walt the wrong way, kind of his Midwest. Walt remains, a son of the Midwest, certainly a person who spent most of his life on the East Coast, but Ithaca is not New York City. and Ithaca, Cornell is as Midwestern as an Ivy League can be, and I think that's an aspect of why he felt comfortable at Cornell, because there's a land grant university, there's a tradition of kind of a popular tradition going back to Ezra Cornell, a place where anyone could get an education. So there are aspects of that really appealed to Walt. And Roosevelt, I think, to Walt represented the antithesis of some of those things. So, and I wrote a book of Franklin Roosevelt, and I wrote a book, actually, Jeff, I'm glad I convinced Jeff that he liked my Roosevelt book, but I was much more favorable to Roosevelt than I think Walt believed true and accurate, but we didn't talk about it. I mean, that's the thing. I think we did both skirted that issue. I didn't want to, frankly, I didn't dare challenge him because he would, I would never change his mind. I knew I would never change his mind. And he was considerate enough of me that I put a lot of effort into this, that he didn't want to challenge that, so we didn't go there. But generally I agreed with almost everything that he wrote, and obviously he's a great admirer of his books, and he would typically send me one of his books and say, I've learned so much from you in writing, as I wrote this book, which I don't know what he really learned from me, but he would say that. He was a gracious person, and again, generous with his praise, where you would think, is that really true? But, well, it was nice of him to say it, and so he was very skilled at dealing with people.
In what ways would you say that his ideas might have evolved over time?
That's a good question. I think I talked about some of that today. I think he started out as very much a disciple of Charles Beard, person who emphasized economic determinants or influences in American foreign policy. I think that, although he remained the Beardian in the sense that he was skeptical about extensive American involvement, particularly military involvement around the world, I think the emphasis on the economic causation lessened somewhat as time went on. He thought that was still important, but less the overriding concern, or necessarily the overriding concern, that he seemed to have that point of view earlier in his career. Again, we've just been talking about this at the sessions. I became more conscious of race as time went on, more sensitive to those issues. As I mentioned this morning, so in my last year of TAing for Walter, it's 1971, 72. No, that's working the dissertation then. So I get to 70, 71. So he assigned, as part of the course reading, Arthur Cappett's play Indians, which is kind of it's a play that takes place in the contemporary era with flashbacks to an earlier period. But it was one of the few things, there wasn't much literature written, historical literature, on what's today a very important topic, namely the continuities between American expropriation of land from the Indians and American foreign policy and other, beyond the 48 states. So, but this was the one way for Walt to kind of bring up that topic using some of the little literature that was available. This was a play, but this was something, I think it showed Walt's commitment to looking at considerations of dispossession of Native Americans as an aspect of American foreign policy. So, I mean, I think he was always sensitive. He was sensitive to the changing times and tried to shift with the times. As again, we were saying just now, he became very concerned with helping bring about the training of more women as PhD students, so there'd be more women in the profession. And he really took that all very seriously. He's a strong commitment to social justice, which I think was there from the beginning, but became even stronger as what conceptions of social justice evolved in the United States.
Speaking as a historian, what aspects of his scholarship do you think would maybe not age quite as well? Were there any?
Not what?
Would not age quite as well? Maybe would not hold up quite as well over time?
What to say. I don't think there are aspects like that. I think, his New Empire book, the first book, it's probably still the best book on that period. The America-Russia and the Cold War books, which we talked about today, that latest edition is, it's 15 years old now. It's still an excellent account. We talked about the clash on U.S.-Japan just now. That's still a classic. I think Michael Jordan book. I think he wrote for the ages. I think not many people. You can say that many people, but I think that's true. Obviously, you can read those books and sometimes tell when they were written. That's true with anybody's scholarship, but I think it does remain relevant. Of course, I'm probably biased with regard to that, but yeah. They say people's kind of like what's the phrase? They're basically their biases or their kind of the hunches in graduate school become lifelong convictions after graduate school.
Let's talk a little bit about Professor LaFeber as a teacher. He's famous for his lectures, lecturing without notes, stopping right on time with just the perfect quote.
Right.
Did that inspire you in any way, yourself as a teacher?
Sure, of course. Yeah, actually, Andy Rodder, are you interviewing him?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, Andy Rodder and I wrote an essay. It was published in Diplomatic History in November 2004 on Walt's class. That's the articles on Walt's lecture class. Yeah, it was an incredible experience in just being part of that. There was, as the classic other people tell you, there are 400 to 500 students in the class. They met Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday at 11. The Saturday class was the fullest because people would bring their dates or parents or whatever to see the phenomenon. Walt, as you said, would come in, write 3 or 4 points on the board, and sit down or sit down on a stool, and lean against the desk, and start talking. Perfectly timed. What can we say? Conclusion at the end of 50 minutes. Okay, now myself, I never dare do it without notes. I go over the notes over and over again, but I will not walk in there without notes. I leave the notes and walk around, but I need the notes. And so I'm not Walt LaFeber in many ways, in most ways, almost always. I'm not Walt LaFeber. Although he got that from Fred Harvey Harrington, the no notes lectures, or very few notes. So,
did you ever ask him to share his tricks, his tips? How did he do it?
No, but I did do once. I knocked on his door shortly before the class. That was rude and a mistake at his office door. And come in. Clearly he was not thrilled. And I opened the door or whatever, and there he's sitting at his desk, and spread out was like maybe 40 or 50 3x5 cards just laid out, which he was like memorizing. He did have to prepare classes, and then he committed to memory. Or as Sandy LaFeber said, that they always lived close to campus, and the idea is Walt could walk to his classes. But as Sandy would say, time and again, it would be 10 of 11, and he would say, you have to drive me to campus, because he didn't have time to walk, because it's kind of a guy who did things at the last minute. I mean, and she said that was true of preparing other things too. He'd do a superb job, but maybe that's part of the frisson of doing it, the excitement of doing it. I can understand that if you're rushed, then your energy is up. His energy was certainly up for those classes. So for myself, I do write 3 points on the board, and my lectures are organized where there's a conclusion, and I believe that's important. Even if you're running late or questions or whatever, cut out material from the middle, but you need a conclusion. You don't just end and say, okay, finish it next time. No, it ends. There's a story. There's a structure, and I believe that's the way to give a lecture. So, in terms of some aspects of the organization, and there are times, as I said in my talk, there's WWWS, what would Walt say? WWWD, what would Walt do? That informs my life, much of my personal and professional life, and I'm sure most of the people down there, because people will say that. And Jeff said, actually, he thought he was the only one, but for many of us, he was a very inspiring example. I mean, a very inspiring example in a way that I'm not sure if people, all we can do in these interviews is give you words and word pictures and things. But he was a real phenomenon. And as the person trying to write his biography, the challenge is, how did that come to be? Mm-hmm. I mean, as I said this morning, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. You could point to this, you could point to that, but the whole of it, he was a charismatic individual. I think that's one way of expressing the magic that was Walt LaFeber.
That's a great way to sum up, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask you one more question.
Yeah,
because
sure.
you were his student in 1969. The famous events at Cornell
Yeah.
of 1969. And I'm just curious to know that, when you were a student at that time, if he had shared with you what was going on, what his thoughts were about those events.
Yeah, he was, he resigned as, he'd been head of the history department. Like I said, that's one reason I was accepted, because I wrote to him and he was in his power to say, sure. He'd never, I know now from letters that I've seen, that he was never thrilled about becoming head of the chairman of the history department, and he resigned. I think he was relieved this was in part, he was upset but what was happening, but in part this was a way to give up a job that he really didn't want to do. I wanted to do even less after that turmoil. And then we talked some about, he was planning to leave Cornell and get a position. They had offered him a position at the University of Maryland. I know that he had said he looked at real estate around College Park, that they were seriously considering it. He thought that James Perkins, the president, was derelict of duty in terms of his obligation to Cornell, that he thought Perkins was too busy spending time in Washington. Perkins had aspirations to get a job in the Kennedy administration, or again, Johnson administration now, and that Perkins was, AWOL. And Walt had contempt for Perkins for agreeing to basically forgive the students who brought guns onto campus and brought guns into Willow Street Hall. And for Walt, that was just absolute no, because the idea was that violence, or the threat of violence or force, would disrupt what the university was. And the university was kind of a sacred place in terms of a venue for the free exchange of ideas and information. And if you violated that with weapons, you undermined everything that the university was set up for. And you think about this, Walt was an incredibly talented person. Now, he could have gone into business, he could have gone into law, he could have gone into government, and it would have been a success. Instead, he stayed as a professor. He remained as a professor, he remained at Cornell, because he thought that the university had such an important value in our society. And in order to have that value, he thought there had to be free exchange of ideas. He also, just the final thing here, he thought that you should respect students, listen to students, talk to them, but they really didn't know how to run the university. The university, he had a sense that this is a job for adults, and so he really didn't think that students should be making decisions about the governance of the university.
Well, I've asked you plenty of questions, but I don't know if there's more that you have, memories that you want to share that perhaps we have not had a chance to touch on.
I can't think of anything. I could always talk more about Walt, but it's just, I just want to say that I think this conference now is a testament to the influence Walt had on so many people, and actually, not just Jeff, but Richard Immerman and Susan Brewer and Doug Little and Andy Rod and other people have all just come together, and there's been no acrimony, no backbiting, no, people. These are very successful, for the most part, people. There's been no jostling for position or primacy or anything like that. I think partly it's Walt's influence, and just the name, Walt LaFeber. End of story. I mean, meaning that it was the higher cause, a higher cause.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.